What is up, guys, and welcome back to part 2 of our databases series. So in the introduction, I got you sort of like introduced into what databases are and how we can integrate them into our Discord bots, because it is very important that as your bot grows, you're going to be dealing with more users. So like instead of using JSON, like you need to use something more structured around high user counts and like lots of traffic going in and out. And honestly, writing and reading from a JSON file, like at some point it just becomes almost of an overload. So that's why instead of using JSON, we can implement a database into our bot and streamline all of the processes that go from our bot to the database, storing information, getting information. It just makes life a lot easier in like a lot of cases when using a Discord bot. So in part 2, we are actually going to be implementing this for real. So in this video, I'm just going to show you an example of database integration in a Discord bot. And then in the next video, we're going to do something that's pretty major, and that's changing our profile system from a JSON file and have it read from a database. And these two videos should give you a really good idea of why we use databases in a Discord bot and how good they are actually. So let's get started then. So first of all, we're not going to do any coding yet. Remember in part 1, I showed you that that 3-phase plan that we're going to go through. So phase 1 is going to be about planning. We're going to plan our database and what we're going to store in it, right? Stuff like username, what server they're in, that server's ID, etc, etc. Very basic, but this should give you an idea of how databases work, and then we'll do it for real with our profile system. So let's get started with Clever Cloud. So if you guys remember, there are many database types, obviously, and there's many websites that host them, or many services basically. And one of those services I'm going to recommend to you guys is actually Clever Cloud, because they actually do some database hosting for free, and they also do some paid versions as well. But for this example, and I'm going to assume most of you cannot afford to pay for stuff like this, like it's always like a really good idea to just give a free option, right? So like in part 1, I did say we are going to be using a PostgreSQL database. Now obviously these guys host many different types of database, and obviously it's up to you, but as mentioned in the last video, it's always advised that you do your research on what database type you want to use, and obviously how to write SQL queries according to that database type. So search on Google Clever Cloud and obviously log in with your GitHub account if you have one. And once you've signed in and done all of that stuff, you should be at this very page here. So this is our sort of dashboard where we can manage all of our databases. As you can see, I already have one for my main bot. This bot is actually running off a database, and that's pretty cool. And I've also got one just for testing purposes. So I have one database for just testing stuff in the bot, and then I have the actual official database. Let's press the create button over here, so create, and then what we're going to do is create an add-on. So it's not an application, we're going to create an add-on. And like as you can see, there's like all these stuff here, but like as you can see, like Clever Cloud actually offer like some few like good database types. They like they offer MongoDB, they offer MySQL, PostgreSQL. There's like a decent amount of stuff here. So obviously we are going to select the PostgreSQL option. So let's press select, and as you can see, there's all these different price points here. So like as you can see, the like first option is free, but it's very limited, as you can see. So there's no logs. Max database size is only 256 megs. So obviously, like you might have to expand on this if you have a lot of users or you're just storing a lot of information in this. Max connection limit is 5. Like for a Discord bot, it's actually barely noticeable unless your bot is in like hundreds of servers. Then it's noticeable. But like if your bot is only in like a few servers, say like 50 to like 50 to 100 servers, then it's barely noticeable. Like there's no metrics, so like can't see what the database is doing, how it's performing. So these are the sort of limitations that come with the free version. But as an example, and just to get started, it's honestly more than enough. Honestly, it's actually more than enough. Obviously, if you want to buy, then obviously there's these options over here. There's like 1 gig versions, 2 gig versions, and there's more connection limits. There's even 1.2 terabyte versions with 64 gigs of RAM. That's insane, but it costs like $2,000, as you can see there. But obviously we are going to go with the free version as an example. So free version, and let's click on next. Next up, it will ask you, where do you want this database to be located and what name do you want to give it. So I'm just going to give it the name of YouTube database. So, you know, like, there's the database for our YouTube tutorial, and since I live in the UK, let's just have it in France because that's the closest to me. So let's click on next, and after that we should be ready. So there we go. Once you've created your database, you should have a nice dashboard with all your details here. Now obviously this information should all be private, but obviously when this video goes live, I will be deleting this database because I don't want anyone accessing this. But as an example, I want to show you guys this information so that you know what you're dealing with. You know, like, it's just to make life a lot easier. So like, as you can see, this is the host, this is our database name, this is the username, and then this is the password, which we can press the lock button to. There we go. There's the password, and as you can see, this is actually part of our connection string, because if you remember, one of those key terms I showed you was the connection string, and that's what allows any application to connect to this database. So all of our details are literally here. All we have to do is put them into our connection string, and we are able to successfully connect to this database. So it's pretty cool, right? Cool. We have now set up our database. So let's test if it actually works. Let's try and connect to this database, and let's view what's in it. And this is where we can use an application called DBEAVER. So like, if you haven't done that, then make sure you download it. All you got to do is just search up DBEAVER download. And this is the page. So, you know, like, the link will be in the description. If you're on Windows, then install the Windows installer. If you're on Mac OS, please don't be on Mac OS. Then like, install that, etc, etc. So make sure you download DBEAVER, and we'll start it up. DBEAVER has started up. It is time to make a connection to our database and view it in this nice database management system. So DBEAVER is a nice application where you view databases, view our schemas and tables, and see what information is in our database. So it's a nice application that just manages our database, right? So what we're going to do is make a new database connection. So like, this top left icon here, where we can press the plus icon, new database connection, and as you can see, there's a lot of database types over here. Look at all these different types of databases. It's crazy as hell. So what we're going to do is press our PostgreSQL or any database type that you've picked for yourself. So this is where we can actually input details about our database. So our host name, like our database name, and like stuff like that. So what we're going like, first of all, what I need you guys to do is make sure you have the driver installed. For me, it's already installed, but when you click on driver properties, it will literally prompt you to like install the PostgreSQL driver. So make sure you have this installed, or otherwise it won't work. So let's go back to our main. So let's fill in all these details and make sure our database works. So our host name, what is this? It's right here, isn't it? This is our host name. So let's just copy this and paste this into the host name. There we go. Next is our database name. So our database name is right here. There we go. So let's copy and paste that in. And next up is our username and password. So again, our username and password is right here. So let's copy and paste our username, which is this, and then our password, and then let's paste it. And obviously make sure to save the password, because it just, you know, like, it's just easier to access, right? So before we click on finish, let's click on test connection and make sure it actually works, right? So let's click on test connection, and yeah, there we go. So it's connected. So let's press OK, and let's press finish, and there we go. This is our database. So now we can click on it to connect to it, and here we go. This is where we can view our databases. So if I click on databases, then here we go. This is our database name, same as this. Yep, there we go. And if we click on that, then there we go. This is where we can view our schemas and all the different things that are going on. Now with most Clever Cloud databases, and with all databases actually, there's already like a few schemas in there, and I'm assuming this is just, you know, like, just for beginners to test out. But we are going to be using none of these schemas, and if we try and delete them, then I don't think it'll work, because yeah, there we go. It says I must be the owner of this schema, and obviously since we are using a service, we are not actually the owner of this database. But that's fine, because we are not going to be using any of these schemas. We're going to be creating our own schema for this bot. So like, once you've got to this page, we are fine. So like, we've got our database set up, like how we can view what's in our databases, all the different schemas that are inside here, and like we're pretty much ready to go. So next stop is setting up our own schema and our own table to store user information in. So once again, for this example, we're going to be storing basic user information into this database. Like as an example, I'm just going to open up Microsoft Word and let's just make a like test table, right? So let me just insert and let's plan our table. What is it do we want to store in this database? So first of all, we want to store user information. Okay, that's set in stone, right? The definition of a primary key in a database is basically a unique identifier of a row of data. So for example, if I have a primary key of 1, then maybe that row of data may have like the username of Bob, or like the server ID of 1234567. So that primary key must be unique. It must be unique for every row of data. So what we can do for this is actually have the primary key as the user number. So let's just have a simple number that pretty much ascends by 1 for each user. So like user number 1, user number 2. So like this can be any number you want, but let's just have it ascend by 1 to make life easy. So our primary key is the user number. So this is the primary key. So this can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for each row, and we will program it to ascend by 1. Now we can start storing user information. So now we can say username. I don't know, like server name, server ID. So these are, like 4 basic Discord user information. So let's get rid of these 2 cells. So this is our basic table for just storing user information. This is where I can get on to database, like property types, because obviously, like in C#, there's different variable types, right? Like string, int, there's long, there's bool, there's like all sorts of stuff like that. So in a database, it's a similar thing. Here, it is very important that you consult your database manual or documentation to see what types you can store in your database. So for example, for PostgreSQL, let me get up the different database types that you can store in a PostgreSQL table. So here we go. Here is the PostgreSQL documentation. And as you can see, this is a table of all the data types that you can store in a database table. So look, there's big int. So like this is just the same as int. There's big serial. There's a bit. There's like boolean. So like that's known as bool. So like that's just simply true or false, just like in C#. There's obviously characters or char, and there's obviously varchar. So like varchar is basically the same as a string. So that's pretty cool. There's date. So in C# that's known as date time, right? Like there's double precision or float or double. Look, fam, like there's loads of different data types in here, and it's up to you guys to mess around with. There's time. So this is the same as time span. There's timestamps. Man, there's like quite a bit of data types in here. So we need to match these data types to what we're storing in our table, right? So let's see, what are we storing in here? So user number is a primary key, and we're going to be storing it as a number. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the user number is actually a big int, right? Types, it's going to be a big int. So it's just a simple integer, right? So this is going to be a big int. Cool. What's our username going to be? So a username is just a simple string, right? It's just, like a plain text string, right? So our username is going to be a varchar. So as you can see, a varchar is a variable length character string. So variable length meaning that it can be set a limit. So I can say varchar and then 10, meaning that it can only accept a limit of 10 characters, or I can just leave it on its own, meaning it can like we can accept unlimited, right? So it's a variable length character string. So it's going to be a varchar. So let's say varchar. Okay, so server name is going to be the same thing, right? Because it's once again like another plain string. So let's say server name is going to be equal to another varchar. So big int for the user number, varchar for the username, and then varchar for our server name. Now server ID is going to be the same thing. It's going to be another big int. And there we go. This is what we need to insert into our SQL query to create this database. So Now what we're going to do is actually make this database table for real using these database types. Let's make our schema and then let's make our database table. What we're going to do is go to SQL editor and then let's press new SQL script. So let's press that. And there we go. It's opened a opened like a text editor where we can write SQL scripts. So once again, I can't stress this enough. If you don't know how to write SQL scripts, do not proceed with this video. Please do your research. Make sure you learn how to write good SQL scripts, and then it will literally help you later on in the long run. If you don't even know how to write SQL scripts, but you're still watching this video, it's just not going to help you, man. It's just not. So please, make sure you do your research. Make sure you know how to write a basic SQL script, and like this will be very easy for you lot. So let's create our schema. So what we're going to do is say create schema if it doesn't exist. So if the schema doesn't exist, please create it. So let's say create a schema if not exists, and then let's give it a name. So let's just name it data. Simple as that, right? So now let's create our table. So let's create a table containing this information. So like there's gonna be 4 columns, and each of those columns will have this specific data type. So let's make a table. So once again, let's say create a table, and once again, if it doesn't exist. So like this is all checks, right? If it doesn't exist, then create it. So if not exists. Like the way you create a table within a schema is to say the schema's name, so our data, and then you say dot. So when you say dot, it is creating a table within that schema. So let's give it a name. I'm going to say user info. Our table is going to be called user info, and it's going to be in our data schema. So hopefully that makes sense. So now let's put in our different columns over here. So what we'll do is open some brackets, and then I'm going to press enter to like do it like this, and then we'll end it off with a semicolon. So in these set of brackets, we are going to put in our column information, right? So first of all is our primary key. What is our primary key? It's user number. So let's say in speech marks, user number, and always do it in lowercase, because I found that when you use NPG SQL in C#, it actually doesn't like it when you put uppercase characters. So like, you know, make sure everything's in lowercase here. So that's the name of the column. Like the next thing to do is set the variable type, or this data type. So our data type is a big int, right? So let's say big int. And then this is our primary key, right? So we must specify that this column is our primary key. So we say primary key. Okay, so next is our username. So our username is a varchar. And we also got to bear in mind that this must be filled in, right? So in more technical terms, this column cannot be null, because if it's null, then it's going to get an error if we try and get the data from the database in C#. So not only is this varchar, but it must also not be null. So let's say our next column is called username, all in lowercase, and then it's a varchar, meaning string, and then it also cannot be null. It must not be null at any given point. So let's say not null. So like that way, this database table knows that anything that we put in this username column must not be empty. And then we'll do the same thing for our server name. So our server name is going to be another varchar, and it's not null again. And then server ID is going to be a big int, and also not null, because every server has an ID. So if it's null, then that means a server somehow doesn't have an ID, or it hasn't been passed in, and that doesn't make sense. So let's say server ID is once again equal to a big int, and then it's not null. So this is our complete database table, and what this is, what this SQL script is going to do is, first of all, create a schema called data, and then it's going to create a table called user info in that schema with these 4 columns, our username being the primary key, and then all of these 3 columns. So what we're going to do is press this, execute SQL script. So press this button here, and this will run our SQL script. So let's execute it. And let's see, there was an error. So what happened? I just added a few speech marks like around it to, you know, like say what exactly this table name is. But as you can see, it's successfully done. So what we can now do is refresh our schemas page. So let's right click on it and press refresh, or press F5. And there we go. We've got our schema data. So let's let's double click on this. And then as you can see, we have our table user info. So let's double click on this. And there we go. Like now we can actually view our database table. So like as you can see, this is our primary key, and then we've got a column for username, which is varchar. As you can see there, username varchar, server name is varchar, and then server ID is an int, or you know, like big int basically. So there we go. We've got our database now set up. So now that we know what exactly it is we are storing, now it's time to write some code to store and retrieve information in this database. Alright guys, so now we'll get to set up our bots to pretty much like interact with our newly created database. So like as you can see here, we've got our tables and everything set up. So now it's finally time to actually integrate this database into our Discord bot. So like if you remember in the if you remember in the part 1 video, I did say we are going to use the npg SQL package. So everything's all set up here. I will make this repo public actually. So this is going to be separate from the main bots repo that I've been doing all my coding in. All the database stuff will be separated from the main repo just to make life easier. Let's install npg SQL. So let's search up npg and then SQL. All we need is just the main package. So let's just install that, and let's get started on linking this database. What we're going to do is I'm going to create a separate folder for just the databases, just to keep it all nice and organized. Right, so let's name this the database, and in here we're just going to have a basic class where we can connect to our database. So what I'm going to call this is the DB engine. So it stands for database engine. It just makes sense to do that, right? So DB engine, cool. And then obviously we are going to make this public, and we are ready to go. So the first thing we're going to do is actually get our connection string ready, because if we have a basic property in this class called connection string, then we can use that in all the methods to connect to this database. So let's make a private string, because this connection string is only meant to be used within this class. So let's make a private string, and then let's say connection string. And then if you remember from the PowerPoint, from the introduction video, you'll know what the connection string looks like. So first of all, we have our host. So that's cool. We'll set this later. So there's our host. Then we have our username, like this. Cool. And then we'll put that in later. Then we have our password. So password. Cool. Equals, and then we'll do that. And then last of all is the database name, isn't it? Yeah. So database. Cool. And we'll fill this in once again. So let's open up our Clever Cloud, and I'm just going to paste in all the different all the different parameters that we need. So first of all is our host. So let me just get rid of this and paste it in like that. There you go. Next is our username. So let me paste in my username, and let me just put it in there. Cool. Next is our password. So let me get the password up. So copy, and then we'll paste it in right here. So this can be quite long, but that's just how it is. And then our database name is right here. Let me copy and paste that over as well. Cool. So now we have our connection string ready. So every time we make a connection to this database, we'll be using this variable. Cool. So, okay, that's all set up. Okay. In order to actually store information in this database, we first need to know how many users there are. So first of all, this is a table for user information. So we are storing users in here, right? So first of all, we need to know how many users there are in the database first, so that we can store the correct primary key. Because if we don't know what the user number is, then we don't know what the correct primary key is. So first of all, we need to consult the database and ask it how many entries or how many rows are there in this table. So let's run an SQL query and test it out. So what we'll do then is make another SQL script right here. So let's click on SQL editor and then SQL script. So what we need to do is pretty much consult this database and ask it how many entries are there in this table. So this is where you need to know SQL scripts and how to write them. So how do you consult a database and get a number of rows in a table? So what we do is say select and then count. So when we say select count, we are trying to get a number, basically. Put 2 brackets and then an asterisk, which means search the whole table. And then we say from. This is where we put our database table. So there's going to be the data schema and then the user info table. So let's say data dot user info, and it's already auto corrected it for us. So that's cool. So now we can put a semicolon here. So what this SQL query is very simple. What this does is it searches the whole table and then it returns to us how many rows there are or how many entries there are in the table. So if we execute it, there's going to be 0. So there we go. Count is equal to 0. So when we get around to storing user info, what we'll do then is execute this query and then add 1 to it. It makes sense, right? Because if we want to add a new user, we want to add 1 plus to the count. So say if right now there is 1 entry in this table right now. So what this SQL query will do is get a count of 1, and then what we do in here is add 1 to it so that we know we are adding a new user. So let's make a method for that. So this is going to be private because realistically, when we write the method for storing the user, we'll be using this, total user method. So let's say private, and then this is going to be an async method. So, bear in mind, a Discord bot is an asynchronous application. So even in the database side of things, we are going to be dealing with asynchronous methods, right? And let's say task. And what we're doing here is in this method, we need to return a number, right? A number, because this method needs to know how many users there are in this table right here. So what we're going to do is make it return a long. You'll see why a long in a sec. So what we'll name this is get total users async, because it is an asynchronous method. So let's name it according to that. And we've got our method here. So what we need to do then is search the database and then execute this query here and then give back a number as a long. So let me show you how to do this, right? So what we need to do first is initialize a connection to our database using this connection string over here. So what we're going to do is say using var, and let's name it connection. So I'm just going to name it con, shorter for connection. And what we're going to do is make a new npg SQL connection to this database. So using what we just installed. So let's say new npg SQL connection. There we go. So npg SQL connection. And let's insert in our connection string, because as you can see, that's one of the overloads for this method, or this new constructor, right? So pretty much everything we do in this everything we do here, we are doing in our database. Let's actually open this connection. So let's say await connection and then open async. So this will open the connection for us and we are ready to do stuff in our database. So what we need to do is execute this query right here. So let's write our query out. So let's say string query, and let's write out this exact same query. So select count from data.userinfo. So make sure all of your spelling mistakes are correct. Make sure you don't get anything wrong. Make sure it's the exact same name as your table name so that no errors happen. Cool. So now we've got our query. Now we need to execute this query. So what we're going to do is make a new npg SQL command. And this is what allows us to execute SQL queries and do many things within our database. It's called an npg SQL command. So let's make another using, and let's say var, and I'm just going to call this cmd. It's short for command. And let's make a new npg SQL command. And let's see what this needs. So first of all, this needs the query, and then it needs the connection. And you know, like autocorrect has already done it for me. But if you want to see the constructor, then as you can see, string cmd text, so the, you know, like command text. So we are executing a query here. So let's put that in, and then it wants an npg SQL connection, which we've got up here. Like in order to execute this style of SQL query and retrieve information from it, what we need to do is execute it in a variable. So what we do is say var user count. So like this is what will get our count, so like that. And what we'll do is say await cmd and then execute scalar async. So if you want to read the description of this method, it says an asynchronous version of blah blah which executes the query and returns the first column of the first row in the result set by the query. So like as you can see, when we execute this is like there's literally only one row, one column. So it's just going to return this. So what we'll do then is do this all in one line. Let's say return, and then let's do the conversion. So what we have to do here is do convert to int64, and that's what will convert it to a nice simple number. To int64 and then user count. So this should now be a long, and you know like the method is now satisfied. So this is how we execute these kind of SQL queries where we have to retrieve some data. Now, like there's other types of SQL queries where we don't need to retrieve information, rather just perform a task for us. And we won't be using execute scalar async for that. We'll be using a method called execute non-query async. So this is all cool, but it's not exactly perfect, is it? Because this can fail at any given point. So like the best thing to do here is put this in a try-catch block, so that if something indeed does go wrong, then the whole thing won't crash and give us errors. So what we'll do is put this whole thing in a try-catch block. So let's say try, and then let's paste all of this code in. So let's do Control X and then Control V, and then let's catch an exception. So exception EX, and what we're going to do is just console.write line it to you know, like the console, and then what we'll do is return and then -1. So what we'll do then is when we execute this method, we will check if it is -1 or not. If it's -1, then something's gone wrong. If it isn't, then it's all gone fine, right? So that's how I get total users async. So we'll be using this in a short while, because now what we're going to do is actually write the method to store our user data. So since we have three main columns here, you know, like one for username, one for server name, and one for server ID, it would make sense to just make a class for that, right? So let me just make a new class that represents this basic Discord user. So let me say duser. So duser, short for Discord user, cool. And let's make all those properties. So let's make it public. So what we'll say is public string and then username. So like obviously we'll get set this, cool. So like there was server name and server ID. So we'll say public string and then server name, get set, and then the server ID is going to be a ulong. So let's say public ulong and then server ID. Let me get set that. Whoops, there we go. Cool. Okay, so like that's all done. All right, now let's make a method for storing our user data. So this is like this one's gonna be public because we'll be using this in our commands, right? So this needs to be public. So let's say public, and this time we are checking if it successfully stored the information, right? So we need to like check if it's true or false. So a bool. So let's say task and then bool. So this is an asynchronous task that checks if it's true or false. Cool. And let's say store user async, or store user information, or just, you know, like any name you want. And what we're storing is this class, our duser. So let's give it a parameter, and let's say duser user. So we are storing a user, or, you know, like we are passing a duser into this method, and we'll use that to like insert it into the database. Now we get to use this method. So first of all, we need to check how many users are there in the database. And then once you've done that, we add 1 to it. Let's say var user number is equal to this method. So let's say await get total users async. And what we then want to do is add 1 to it. So like, this is what I meant. So when we're storing a new user, this primary key must be unique. So every user we store, it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and it will just go on forever. So we add 1 to the current users in the database, and this prevents any conflictions in the primary key column. So that's cool. Let's also check if this is -1, because this might throw an error, right? So let's say if the user number is not greater than 0, let's check if it's equal to -1. So if it's -1, let's on purpose throw an error. Future me here, this code is actually wrong, because what we're doing here is, if this method is supposed to give -1 if something's gone wrong, but what we're doing is we are already adding 1 to it. So if this is if this is -1, then yes, throw a new exception. Else, then we add 1 to it. So let's actually take this off. So let's just get the total users, and if it's -1, then obviously throw the error. Else, we're just going to add 1 to it. So let's say user number is equal to user number plus 1. So that should, that should pretty much get rid of the error if it does get -1, but then it already adds 1 to it. So it's going to get 0. So that's not going to trigger this if statement. So it's the proper way to do it. Back to the video. But now let's do the same thing. So let's make a new NPG SQL connection, and let's execute an SQL query which inserts this data into our database table that we've got over here. So let's so let's say using once again. So once again, var connection equals a new NPG SQL connection. There we go. That autocorrect doing its thing. And once again, let's do await connection open async. So one thing that you have to make sure is that all of these things run asynchronously. Otherwise, there's gonna be like a few timing errors that may occur. So once again, let's make our query. So string query. So this time, what is the query? For inserting some information into a database. This is involving the word insert. So what I'm going to do is say insert into, and then our database table name. So it's going to be data.userinfo. So let's say data.userinfo. Next in brackets, we need to say what our columns names are. So we need to specify the name of all these columns here, so that this SQL queries know what columns to insert each bit of data into. User number. So this must be the exact same name. Please get your spelling correct, otherwise it's going to pose an error. So username, server name, and then server ID. So we've now said what columns we want to store this data in. Now we say what the values are we want to store. So in a nice concatenated string over here, let's say values, and then let's put in our values. So like in the same format as we've got here. So our user number, our username, our server name, and then the server ID. So what is the user number going to be over here? It's going to be this variable, because we've got our total users in the database and we've added 1 to it so that the primary key is unique. So in curly brackets, let's say user number. Simple as that. Simple as that. So let's also put this in speech marks like this. So let's put a comma and let's put in our username. So our username is going to be from this duser variable. So let's say user.username. Cool. The server name is going to be like the same thing. So user.servername. Cool. And then our server ID is going to be the same thing. So yeah, so let's say user.server ID. And this is how we insert data into our database. This is an insertion query right here. So let's now execute this query. Let's make sure to add a semicolon at the end inside the string, because this is an SQL query after all. So let's do our the NPG SQL command now. So let's say using once again var cmd is equal to a new NPG SQL command. We pass in our query and then like the actual connection that we're using. Cool. So like to execute a simple query where we don't retrieve information, let's say await cmd execute non-query async. And this will just insert this data into our database. And what we can do is check here if it's correctly done so. So once again, let's put all of this into a try-catch block. So let's say try. And then let's paste all of this code in. Control X and then Control V. And then let's say catch exception EX. And once again, we say console.writeLine. So this method's still not satisfied yet. So once this is all done, we then say true, right? So after all of this is done, so it's done like executing the query and it's going to close off our connection, then we return true. So don't say this inside the using, because it's not closed the connection and you don't want to leave this connection open. If you leave a connection open and then another method tries to open another connection, then it's going to conflict. So we say it outside of the using where we're using our connection. So once again, in our catch statement, we return false because something's gone wrong here. Okay, so hopefully you guys understand what's going on in this method. So first of all, we are making a query to basically like ask the table how many rows of data there are in this specific database table. So like once we've done that, then we know how many users there are in the table, and then we can add one to it because we are adding a new user, right? So what we're doing here is then we are opening a new connection. So everything we do in this using, once again, is in the database. So when we're saying new NPG SQL connection with our connection string, we are doing everything inside the database in this using. Every time you do this, make sure you open async this connection. When you do this close bracket here, it actually automatically closes our connection. So like there is no need to do close async in this case, because like this already does it for us. So there's no need to worry about, you know, like properly opening and closing. Just make sure you open it inside of the using over here. And what we're doing is executing a query which inserts in our information as you've got here. And what we're doing in our npg SQL command is executing this SQL query, and hopefully we should have a valid entry in our database table over here. So let's give this a try and let's make a command. So like what we're going to do first is make a new instance of this DB engine, right? So let's say var DB engine is equal to a new instance of the DB engine. And that's cool. So like what we'll do is store our user information into this duser class. So let's say var user info equals a new new instance of the duser. So let me open some curly brackets, and username is equal to ctx.user.username. So pretty simple. And then let's say the server name is equal to the ctx.guild and then the name. And then the server ID is ctx guild and then ID. So there we go. It's pretty basic, right? It's pretty basic. Now we're going to use this class to store our information. So let's actually store this in a variable. So let's say var is stored equals awaits DB engine, and then let's say store user async. And let's pass in our user info, which is of type duser, because that's what it wants. So this method is going to say if it's true or false. So if it's true, then it's successfully stored. If something's gone wrong, then it will let us know in this variable right here. So let's do a simple if statement. So let's say if is stored is equal to true, then let's just send a message back. So let's say await ctx channel send message async, and let's just say successfully stored in database. Cool. And then if it's false, that's gonna be an else. Then we'll say something went wrong. So let's say await ctx channel send message async, and then let's say something went wrong. Let's give this a go. So what I'm gonna do is start the bot up. Okay, so let's execute store. I'm in American keyboard, aren't I? No, okay, okay, so store. Alright, so what this is going to do is pretty much execute our store user async. So once this is done, we're going to check our database table to see if it's stored my information. So let me press enter. Okay, so let's check the console. Okay, so yeah, it says successfully stored in database. So in the console, nothing's gone wrong. So let me check my database. So let's right click and then let's refresh it. And there we go. How cool is this? So it's got my username, the server I'm in, and then the ID of that server. Perfect, right? So let me try for another user. So let's try and get another user to, like execute this command, and I'll show you how this method works. So, like where was it? The, like get total users async. So what I'm going to do is put a breakpoint here, and I'm going to invite someone in the server and get them to execute this store command. And like this should give you, like a very good idea of how it works. And I'm going to tell them to like pretty much execute like the exact same store command. So let's see if they do it. Okay, so looks like the debugger has triggered. Let's see what happens line by line. So it's going to open the connection in this method, and it's going to execute this, count query. So this query should now get 1 because there is 1 entry in this database now. So let's, like keep going. So user count, let's see what that is. So yeah, there we go. User count is equal to 1, and it's going to convert that into a long, and then it's going to do its thing. So now user count should be yeah. So like there we go. It is now 2 because it's got this, because it's 1, and then it's added 1 to it. So it's going to go through all of this now, and then if I press continue, then like if we check our Discord, then there we go, successfully stored in database. So if we check our database now, so let's refresh it. There we go. So now we've got a primary key that's very unique. So every time a user stores their details, it's going to increment by 1, therefore making it unique, and it's not going to conflict. So that's perfect. So like this is just a basic example of, like storing basic user information in our database. Obviously, like in the next video, I'm going to be changing my entire profile system to work just like this. So it's going to be very cool. So far, like data can be stored, but data can't be retrieved. So let's make a command and some methods to retrieve data from this database according to whoever executes this command. So say for example, I just make like a profile command. I want it to be able to get my details from the database. So let's do that. So like to retrieve someone's information from a database, we need to write a good SQL query for that first. So it's always important to test out your SQL queries and query the database properly before you implement it in code. So let's write another SQL script. So let me open like a new one. Just for this example, let's get a user based on their username and then the server ID they're in, right? So like, so like this username's got to match this username, and then the server ID's got to match as well. So let's write an SQL query to retrieve a user from the database. Select, and then just before we say what we want to retrieve, let's say from, and then our database table name. So data, and then user info, and let's call it u as a variable name. So this table is called u in this SQL query. So what do we want to select first? All 4 of these columns where the username matches what we pass in and the server ID matches what we pass in too. So let's just do my username and server ID as an example. So let's pick u.usernumber, so u.usernumber, and let's put a comma, and then let's say u.server ID. So it's going to pick all of these columns based on this, like this database table, and let's provide our query where we say what the username needs to be matched to. So let's say where the username is equal to my username. So let's just put my username in as an example. So let me just copy that, and then we'll paste it in here. So it's going to pick all of these columns where the username is equal to my name over here. And let's also put the server ID, screw it. So let's say and the server ID is equal to this. Cool. So let's execute it. So okay, the error executed during SQL query execution. Maybe single speech marks, maybe? Yeah, okay, it's single speech marks, okay. So there we go, it works. So it's literally got my column over here. So this is the kind of SQL query that we need to do, but instead of hard coding what we're searching for, we can use concatenated strings in C#, right? So that will help us. But this is the main SQL query that we need to execute to get a specific user from this database table. So let's implement that. So let's say public async and then task. And what should we return here? Let's do two things, because first of all, we need to ensure that this is a success. So bool, and we also need to return the actual user details. So a D user. So in brackets, let's say bool, and then our D user. So let's D user. There we go. So that's cool. And let's say get user async. Seems pretty simple, right? And what we're going to pass in here is these two things. So our username and the server ID. So let's say string username, and then let's also say ulong server ID. So cool. That's our method set up. So let's just make a temporary, D user here so that we can store our details to that. So let's just say D user, and let's call it the result. D user and then the result. So nothing is going to happen until we execute our SQL query, and then we can set this variable to our, details. So once again, let's make the connection. So step one is to always initiate the connection. So using var connection equals a new npg SQL connection with our connection string. Cool. Next is to open the connection. So await connection, open async. So make sure you get all these steps correct, because if you don't, it's going to be a hard time. All right, next up is our query. So string and then query. Let's write our query out. So it's going to be like this. So data.userinfo. And then let's put in our, and let's put in our matches. So where the username is equal to, in single speech marks, let's put in our username that we're passing up here. So username. And let's do the same thing for our server ID. So and server ID equals the server ID that we're passing up here. So once again, let's say server ID is equal to the server ID. And I need to make sure to put a U here. Now it's time to execute it. So let's create a new npg SQL command. So using var command is equal to a new npg SQL command with our query and the connection. So here it's going to be a bit different, because we are trying to retrieve data from the database. So as you can see, there is three types of SQL queries we are doing here. This one is inserting data, so it's creating data. This one is reading and retrieving data, and this one is more of a check. So there's many types of SQL queries. Once again, make sure you do your research and you know what's what. So what we need to do here is make a reader. So let's say var reader, and let's execute the reader in this command. So let's say await cmd and then execute reader async. So let's say reader.read. So read async obviously. So let's say await reader.read async is equal to obviously a new D user. So let's finally initialize this class. And what we're going to do is store our different information in there. So let's end this off, and let's say the username. So think of this as an array. So what this is going to do is, first of all, ignore the primary key, and then username is going to be entry 0 if it was an array, right? Server name is going to be entry number 1, and then server ID is going to be entry number 3. So 2. So it'll go 0, 1, and then 2. First of all, our username is reader, and reader is a string, right? So let's say get string, and then we say position number 0. So it's going to ignore the primary key, and then this is the first position. So position number 0. Server name is position number 1, and then server ID is number 2. So once again, the server name is going to be another string. So it's going to be reader get string at position number 1. And then the server ID is going to be a bit different. It's going to be get int 64. So let's say reader get int 64. and then we say at value number 2. And since server ID is of type ulong, we need to cast this as a ulong. So let's say ulong. So there we go. First, we've queried our database to get all of this information based on what we pass in as our username and server ID. It's going to do that, and then we get our information based on what type it is. So if it's a string, then we say get string. If it's a like ulong, then we say get in64. If it's a date, then we say get date. It's literally all there. So like for example, like if I just do reader, and then I say get, look at all of these gets: get name, get ordinal, get schema table, get stream, get string, get time span, get value. Fam, like there's literally like a crap ton of things. Look, here we go. Get boolean for true or false, get byte, get chars, get data. So cool. Like we've pretty much executed all of that. So once again, like once you've done with this, it's going to be a true and then our result. So let's say true because it's all done, and then let's say the result. So it's going to like do that, and then let's put all of this in a try catch. So let me do it up here. So try, and then let's paste all of this in. So Control X, Control V, and then obviously if something goes wrong, then we return false and nothing. So catch, and then exception EX, and then we first console.writeline it, and then we return a false and then nothing, so null. And obviously we will check if it's true or false. So if it's true, then it successfully retrieved our information. If it's false, then we will show the error message. Let's actually implement this in a Discord bot command now. Once again, let's make a new instance of our DB engine so that we can execute this new method that we've got here, get user async. So let's say var user, so cool, and then let's say awaits DB engine, and then let's say get user async. Simple as that. So let's pass in the username and then our server ID. So let's say ctx user username, and then ctx guild, and then ID. And this variable should now contain a bool and a duser. So first of all, let's check if it's successfully done its job. Is it true or false? So let's say if the user and then item 1. So item 1 is the bool, and then item 2 is the duser. Is item 1 equal to true? So if it is, let's display a basic looking embed that shows all of those user details. Else, let's say something went wrong. So let's say awaits ctx channel send message async, and let's just say something went wrong when getting your profile. So here, let's make a nice embed. So let's say var profile embed equal to new Discord embed builder. The color is Discord color.blue. So let's say dark blue, screw it. So let's say the title is like let's say the user's profile. So in a nice concatenated string, let's say the user to retrieve, and then item 2. And this should contain all of our details. So server name, username, server ID. So let's say their profile. And then in the description, let's just say what their server is and what server ID is. Cool. Okay. So like we've done a lot here. So this command is going to execute our get user async method, which is going to query our database and get specific user information based on what we put in as our username and the server ID. So it's going to get that one user that matches based on what we pass in as the username and server ID. So let's give this a try. So let's start it up. Cool. So nothing's gone wrong. Okay, let's do this. So let's say profile. And okay, something went wrong when getting your profile. So what's gone wrong? Okay, so there's a syntax error at or near username. Okay, so at position 81. So line 60, where's this gone wrong? So line 60, so it's had trouble executing that. Okay. Maybe I need to put a space here. Okay, so let's try that again. So now it's saying can't cause database type big int to string. So maybe I need to put 1, 2, 3 because maybe it also assumes the like primary key. So let me try putting 1, 2, 3. So 1 is going to be. Let's try that. Maybe that's just how it is because so like let's see. Let's just see. So profile once again. There we go. Okay, now it worked. Okay, so it looks like I made a mistake there. So it looks like it does assume the primary key to be like another variable type. So it looks like this is 1, 2, and then 3. So this is 0. All right, so now it works. So yeah, there we go. Like like my profile, it's got my details. So all I'm showing you in this video is just a basic example of interacting with a database using a C# Discord bot. It is very simple, but it does take a bit of research to know how to use all of this stuff. So this is a bit of a complex thing, so obviously don't watch this video and expect to understand it all. Like maybe pause it, rewind it a bit, see what's going on, and also try it out for yourself. Don't watch this video and not try it out for yourself, because things like this take a lot of practice, a lot of experimentation, loads of messing about with all the different methods that NPG SQL offers. So have a mess about with this, obviously. If you have any questions for me, then don't hesitate to make a comment below or join me in my Discord server, link is in the description. But apart from that, that is how you do basic databases in a Discord bot. Next video, we'll be rewriting our entire profile system with our leveling system, our balance, XP, and all that kind of stuff from a JSON to a database. So our profile system, after the last video, should now always get its information from a database. So hopefully you guys enjoy this video. It's a bit of a long one, but that's just how it is. So yeah, make sure you guys like and sub to my channel, and I'll see you lot in the next one. Peace out.
Now which way do we go is a question to ask. There are so many choices that it's hard not to